Because the thing is, this is not an easy teaching. This is not an easy teaching. If you think it's easy, then you never had anybody hurt you. Because you see, when you've been hurt, feelings of anger and feelings of betrayal and feelings of hurt and bitterness and resentment just overtake you, and sometimes they even overwhelm you. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And guess what? The closer the relationship, the more intense the anger. The more intense the resentment, and the bitterness run deep. And some of us have perfected bitterness. You see, and when that happens, it is so hard to take that first step. So hard. And yet that's exactly what Jesus tells us we have to do. You see, all that matters to God is not who did what, when, and how, and first. What matters to God is that a relationship that has blessed your life or impacted your life, if it's important enough, sooner or later, you need to swallow your pride and take that first step. Even if you're not at fault. Even if you're not at fault. Y'all got quiet on me. Ushers, if the door's locked. Okay, good. Next observation then, since you ain't going to like that one, you really ain't going to like, well, maybe you will like this one. Jesus says that there may come a time when you have to end a relationship. Now listen to what the gospel passage says next. If he or she listened to you, you have won them over. But if he or she will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And if he or she refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he or she refuses to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or tax collector. Now, I know I have to be careful right here, because I don't want a single one of you going out of here and telling folks that the pastor is advocating you break off a relationship. I am not doing that. Okay? But I have to tell you, not every relationship is made in heaven. Amen? Reverend Barbara Brown Taylor, in her book, Home by Another Way, tells a story about a woman who's dying of cancer. She's in the last stages of cancer and near death. And all of a sudden, her husband has a heart attack and dies. And at his funeral, folks lean over her wheelchair. They're trying to console her, but they do it by reminding her, honey, it won't be long till you and him are together again. With consolation like that from friends, who need enemies? And later, the woman was alone with Reverend Taylor, and Reverend Taylor said tears was running down the woman's face, and she looked up and said, I'm never going to get away from that man, am I? That story will either make you laugh or make you cry. But the truth is that not every relationship can be or should be healed, particularly in cases of abuse. And let me tell you something. If you have a friend or family member who always brings the worst out in you, who's always tearing you down, who's always making you question even your self-worth, get as far away from as you can and stay there. When Jesus said, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector, that doesn't mean you do them in, okay? No, it means forgiving them, but it means staying away from them as far as possible. That's what it means. There are some relationships that should be severed. There are some relationships that cannot be healed unless the other person makes some changes. And Jesus said, there may come a time when you have to end a relationship. Amen? Now, what do you do when you get to that point? Last observation. we need to turn to our primary relationship. We need to turn to our relationship with God. If a relationship that is important to us cannot be healed, we need to reach out to our friends, particularly friends in church, as Jesus suggests. But the most important place we need to reach out first is we need to turn to God. We may pray for a relationship to be healed, but we certainly need to pray that God heal us if a relationship can't be healed. And we need to turn to our relationship with God, and we need to ask God to help us to accept the inevitable and to keep us from bitterness and resentment. And no matter what they're throwing at us, we need to continue to pray, God, you keep me from getting bitter and resentful, because that just hurts me. And you've heard me say it so many times, when you are bitter and resentful, what you've done is you've drank a cup of poison, and now you're hoping the other person gonna die. It don't work that way. Forgiving them and moving on might be the only reconciliation possible in some relationships. And so you ask God to help you forgive them. That's important. I didn't say just in the relationship. I said you ask God to help you forgive them. Paul said in the epistle, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For the one who loves their fellow person has fulfilled the law. You are still required by God's law to love them. When you love somebody, you can't do them in. But that don't mean you have to be with them. You love them from afar, from a distance. I'm just kidding. Jesus still loved the tax collector. Jesus still loved the pagan, even though no relationship existed between them. And we too must continue to love that person, even if that relationship can't be healed. 1 John 4:16 says, God is what? And that's why we have to turn to our relationship with God, because God's the only one that can help us love those who have hurt us. I can tell you from experience, you hurt me, my first instinct ain't to love you. I'm going to need some help with that one. Only God can do that. And especially if it's one of those relationships that have been severed and broken.